Speaking of it, though, how do we feel about this year's Rookie of the Year race? Because I know me and Cameron were talking about it a little bit before the pod, but it feels like this year, and obviously with last year, the dialogue around that class, it feels like this year is so wide open. And obviously, I think a guy like Alex Sarr could be up there because obviously he was a number 2 pick, and there was talk of him going number 1. But I feel like as far as who fills in after that is interesting because obviously I think it's going to come down to opportunity and like what people's minutes are looking like. But it feels like there's not a lot of rookies in this class who are going to be starting right off the bat, you know, and they could be kind of buried in the rotation. So I think that makes this race a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely like there's not a lot of guys who have obvious opportunity coming in. Like I really don't know, besides of Zach Edey, which is like, it's pretty penciled in that he's going to start. I don't know how many guys are actually going to start in their first year, at least to start the year. Like, It just doesn't seem like many guys are penciled in as the starters. So it'll be interesting coming out of training camp, seeing who earns that spot, like who is able to take minutes away from the veterans in front of them. But I personally think that as it currently stands, I would place my money on somebody like Alex Sarr or one of Dillingham and Shepard, just because, like, Dillingham kind of has a clear-cut opportunity like we just talked about. He has a role that's already established. He's going to get minutes, and it looks like from the first preseason game, they're not going to make him be gun-shy. So
yeah,
he's going to have an opportunity to put up numbers. And Shepard, I just think that as the year goes on, his shooting is going to make it hard for the Rockets to keep him off the court. So if he can get on the court and stay on the court consistently, I just think his production will be enough to at least be in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting, too, though, because Dillingham, obviously, he has guys in front of him who I think it's going to be hard for him to pass. But obviously, he doesn't need to do that to win Rookie of the Year. But even Shepard, too, like, I think compared to a lot of the other rookies, it would be easier for him to rise up just because that team is so young. But at the same time, it also makes you realize, like, this, obviously with the class being considered weaker, it's going to look so much different. But I think it's going to be super, super tight because I think it's going to be like late in the season where we really see a guy run away with it.
Yeah, just looking back at the past 5 or 6 years of Rookie of the Year winners, only 2 of the last 6 were number 1 picks, but it's been back-to-back years where the number 1 pick in the draft took home Rookie of the Year. We're talking about Victor, and we're talking about Paulo Banchero, but before that, it was guys like Scotty Barnes who were in the top 5 still, LaMelo Ball, Ja Morant. So in a year like this where it's so up in the air and there's not really off the bat a clear runaway victory for Rookie of the Year like we saw with Wemby last year, I'm surprised we're not talking about Zaccharie Risacher because I feel like with Atlanta no longer having DeJounte Murray, they may need him to take on a little bit of the role early on in the season, and maybe his numbers will go up there pretty high.
I just think he's very skinny. Like, I think he's really skinny, and that's going to make it hard for someone who already really doesn't have a really effective handle. Like, he's not necessarily a liability in that area, but he's not necessarily what I would call a creator on offense. Mm-hmm. So I kind of see the path towards Rookie of the Year being hard for someone whose main job is going to be catch and shoot in defense.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like he's just kind of a complimentary guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like looking at Alex Sarr, who's supposed to go number 1, even though he's not necessarily a guy who's going to be your number 1 option per se, he does so much defensively, and I don't think Risacher, I don't think he brings that value to both sides of the ball like Sarr does. So it's like, I think it would be hard for a guy like him just because he's kind of I don't want to say more quiet player, but
his game is just kind of quiet. Like, even when he puts up solid numbers, like, he can have a really good shooting game, play good on defense. It doesn't really stand out because it's almost like Kawhi Leonard in a sense. If you watch Kawhi Leonard play, it's very kind of stiff and robotic, and it's not like, I just don't think his game is necessarily complementary to winning an award like Rookie of the Year. Like, he might have one of the biggest impacts, but I just can't remember the last time a defensive player won Rookie of the Year.
So you guys think the streak of 2 years in a row, number one pick, taking it home, that's over?
It's obviously still too early, but as of now, I'd say so. I think another guy who I'm kind of forgetting is Stephon Castle. I'm interested to see how he looks, and I don't know what it's going to look like because I've only seen a little bit of the Spurs and like what they've kind of talked about in training camp. But Chris Paul had a lot of high praise for him, and obviously Chris Paul he's a guy with a lot of ball knowledge, and his thing, obviously he hasn't won a lot of championships, and he's not the greatest playoff performer. But actually, let me take that back, because outside of the finals, he's been an amazing player. But what I'm trying to say is that Chris Paul is a guy who develops a lot of young guys. Like, he played a part in Shai's development, and obviously Stephon and Shai have drawn a lot of comparisons with, the way that they run the point.
Yep.
And Summer League looked really good for Stephon Castle, and he's a player who I'm more interested to see. So I think he's kind of my sleeper for Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, because going back to the opportunity thing we were talking about, Devin Vassell is kind of going to be hurt for the beginning of the season for the Spurs. And while they might pick like a veteran like Julian Champagne or somebody like that to start at first, I think if Stephon Castle is showing enough in practice, he has the opportunity to take that starting job, at least while Vassell is out. And if he can start, I think we've, like you said, with Chris Paul, we've seen guys, like especially younger guys, really thrive next to him.
Yeah, talking about sleepers for Rookie of the Year, it's so weird to talk about too, because we already just said that it's up in the air, so there's really no favorite. So how could there be a sleeper? But I guess just in terms of where they were drafted, I'd be looking at someone like a Cody Williams or maybe a Modest Buzelis, because one, I think Chicago is going to be one of the weaker teams in the NBA this year. So by December, if they're already, almost 10 games under 500, they might just hand the reins to Modest Buzelis and just say, go develop, get thrown into the deep end. And if he can put together a stretch where he's averaging, 15 points, 8 rebounds, 4 or 5 assists, like that's going to be pretty impressive, even if the team is not doing well as a whole. So do you think anyone in that kind of 10 to somewhere down the line, even further than that, could get their name up there in Rookie of the Year voting?
I really like Bub Carrington's game. I think that he's somebody that if they give him the ball enough, that he could possibly make a run for it. The problem is he has guys like Jordan Poole in that backcourt. It's not going to be very much opportunity, even if he does get on the court. Like, Poole is going to take up a lot of that space. So I think he's somebody that if they possibly move Poole, or if like he goes more to like a point guard role, that he might have a chance to make a run for it.
Yeah, I just feel like it's going to be tough for someone who's not a consistent starter every single night to pull that Rookie of the Year, because like I'm even looking at someone like Khalil Ware, who had a really strong summer league, but you're on the same team as Bam Adebayo. So like what's his production going to look like numbers wise compared to someone who's going to be that starting center every single night for their team? So like I don't know if he's going to be having the same numbers as a Donovan Clingan, because they're both kind of up in the air in terms of who's going to be the starting center. Well, I guess more Bam Adebayo is for sure, but I could see Portland kind of having a discussion maybe at the trade deadline about DeAndre Ayton, but someone like Donovan Clingan as well, even though he's in the top 10, what's his production going to look like rookie year?
That's another thing I'm trying to think about too, because I feel like with a class like this, it could be somebody who's very defensive minded that ends up winning it.